Gene Searchinger is here. His new film is called The Human Language. It will be on PBS on February 10th, 17th, and 24th. Also joining us is Steven Pinker. He is at MIT, and his book is called The Language Instinct, How the Mind Creates Language. And we want to talk about language briefly here and how children, for example, either acquire it or whether they're born with it. And I start with that question for you, Steven Pinker. Are children born with it, or do they acquire a sense of language?
They're not born with any particular language.
Yeah.
No child is born with English or Japanese, but I think children are born with an understanding of how language works, and so they just have to learn the details of their particular language. But I think they're born with the general logic or plan of language.
Yeah. Tell me what you hope to do in your film, in which you were the writer and the producer and the filmmaker of The Human Language.
What I really want to do is spread the word about something that's absolutely astonishing. There was a revolution in the thinking about language in 1957 when Noam Chomsky wrote one book, and it changed the whole study of linguistics.
How did it change it? What did Noam Chomsky say that made the study of linguistics so different?
Well, you ought to ask Steve that, but in my shorthand he said people are born knowing language, that there is a universal grammar, that all the languages of the world are far more alike than they are different. They're all basically the same language. And this was a revolutionary idea. Up to that time, people have been studying individual languages like collecting butterflies. And he said, no, what we should be studying is what language itself is inside the human mind. That completely reversed people's way of looking at things. And Steve Pinker is one of those guys who's carried on and studies that.
I'm coming back to Steve Pinker in a second, but what you do in this film, in this part series, 3-part series here, 3 hours, is that you give a whole variety of people an opportunity in an interview form to talk about language, talk about the creation of language, talk about how language works, yes?
Yes, and we show people doing it in Papua New Guinea, former headhunters and Aborigines in Australia who have a system of language that's like Latin. Yeah. And Eskimos, and people all over the United States, from circus performers to comedians and children and children and children.
Why do you call it the language instinct?
I think that humans have language in the same sense that birds sing, that bats use sonar, that spiders spin webs. I think it's part of the biology of being human. I don't think language is a cultural invention like agriculture or the wheel.
Yeah. You also believe that image has a real impact in language. How does it work?
Well, I think that as much as I'm a fan of language and I've devoted my life's work to it, I think language is not the only mode of thinking. I think we also think in images, we think in abstract propositions.
And words marry themselves to images immediately.
That's right, yeah. I think that when we reason spatially, we're not using language, and I think even the thoughts underlying language are not themselves words, but that we use words as the primary means of getting ideas from one head into another.
Yeah. Chomsky, again, back to him. I mean, he changed it, in your own words, changed the understanding of language?
Yes. Well, for one thing, as Gene mentioned, he said that language is part of the study of biology, and that was a revolutionary idea in its time. Language was one of the humanities. You studied it the way you studied any other part of the cultural tradition. Also, he set the main problem of language as acquisition of language by children. He said, if you really want to get to the essence of language, figure out how kids, after a couple of years of hearing their mothers and fathers speak, can not only learn the words, but put them together in brand new combinations that fit the grammatical pattern of the language and that will last them a lifetime, expressing brand new thoughts in brand new combinations. That's the fundamental problem.
Now, how do you feel about people like William Safire, who write about language and derivation?
They're doing something different from what Steve Pinker does.
What is it they're doing different? John Simon or Bill Safire?
They're talking about grammar as you learned it in school, on what is correct English, as opposed to incorrect English. To the linguists, there's no such thing as correct and incorrect. There's what you're born with and what people understand, and then there's what the prescriptivists or the school moms tell you is correct, like you mustn't split an infinitive. And that's what William Safire is interested in. The linguists really aren't interested in that.
And you just want to make sure people understand that's not language, we're talking about something else.
It's more like etiquette.
It's more like etiquette.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the magic of this for you? I mean, why'd you want to make this piece, this film?
The line that finally dominated everything in this thing is that language is the most human thing about being human. I mean, we have the opposable thumb, and we don't have fur, and we stand upright, and all of these are very important things. But the thing that distinguishes us from all other creatures, whatever you may have heard about dolphins and chimps, is that we have language, and they don't. So the question is, what is it that we have? What is language? And that's what Chomsky set out to find out.
And what do all languages have in common? What's the essence that they have in common?
I would say two things. One is the ability to refer to concepts by an arbitrary pairing of a sound and a meaning. So we use the word duck to refer to the things that go quack. It could have been chicken, but it just happens to be duck. It could have been something else in another language. And we memorize tens of thousands of these words, and that is true in every language. There are vocabulary in the tens of thousands. Second, words get combined into phrases and sentences according to grammatical rules that manipulate things like nouns and verbs.
And what's the biggest misunderstanding about language, you think?
Well, that language is a cultural artifact,
Right.
that would be one, and that language is going down the tubes, that it's deteriorating. The kids listen to too much rock and roll and Beavis and Butthead and the Valley Girls
And
the
that's not
jocks.
true, then?
That is not true.
And what's the evidence that it's not true?
Well, one bit of evidence is if you go back through history, in every century, everyone has been saying that the language is going down the
Language is going
tubes.
to hell, yeah.
In the 1700s, they say that by the 1800s, the language will be gone. In the 1800s, they say by the 1900s.
Well, but is there anything to say that language is getting better? I mean, that our sense of appreciation, our sense of use is better?
Language is like walking getting better or worse. I mean, we walk. Some people walk better, some people walk worse.
All right. Let me just say that the Human Language Genes film is on PBS on February 10th and 17th and 24th at 10 p.m. And for those of you who really are interested in this subject matter and want to explore it, the national bestseller, The Language Instinct, How the Mind Creates Language, Steven Pinker in paperback. We'll be right back. Stay with us.